Hi, everybody. Welcome to Profiling Evil with Mike King and Chris McDonough. Chris, how you doing tonight?
Mike, how you doing, buddy? We're excited.
Doing well. Hey, we are going to talk about the Jodine Serrin murder tonight. It occurred on Valentine's Day in 2007. You know, it would take more than 11 years to solve her death. And this cold case really became quite important in Southern California. We have a couple of really wonderful guests tonight to help us tell the story. And I really want to point first to Detective Kovanda, who you're going to introduce, because he doggedly chased this case and solved it. And that's no easy task when you pick up a case that you never had anything to do with from the first. But why don't you introduce Eric, and then we'll move on and introduce Barbara, our next guest.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, Eric, how are you? It's great to see you.
Good to see you, Chris.
It's good. And to all of our visitors out there and our guests, we're grateful you're here with us tonight and supporting what we're doing here. So we've got a real hero here tonight. The Sergeant Kovanda comes to us with quite a pedigree. He works for the Carlsbad Police Department in Southern California. He worked for San Diego PD and Bloomfield, Connecticut PD. And he's been solving homicides on both the East and the West Coast, not only active homicides, but cold cases. And he served on the state attorney's general cold case unit. Is that right, Sarge?
That's
okay,
correct.
Awesome. And also the FBI's Violent Crime Task Force. So we are really excited to have Sergeant Kovanda, Eric Kovanda, who, by the way, hails from an area where I grew up. And right now, he is an instructor with the National Criminal Training Justice Training Center, where he teaches how to enhance investigations using various techniques. And we're going to hear about his great work tonight. So that's just one of our guests, Mike. That's just one.
Yeah, let me bring out the next. And actually, we have to thank Eric for bringing Barbara to the table with us tonight to talk about this. I'd like to introduce Barbara Rae-Venter. Barbara is a retired intellectual attorney, and you're going to find this really amazing because Dr. Rae-Venter is not only a Juris Doctor, but she has a PhD, and that's just really impressive. And thank you for putting time into this. But Barbara became a genetic scientist because of a personal interest, Chris. And this is pretty amazing that it has influenced our profession so profoundly. Years ago, Barbara trained in genetic genealogy to solve some mysteries in her own family history line. And because of this passion, she became well known. It was interesting to me that Barbara was later approached by a New Hampshire state police officer who was handling a cold case. And I hope I get this right, Barbara, because I think I remember you saying that he actually was nearing the end of his career, and he called you and said, I need a little help to see if I can solve a murder case I've been carrying on the books for a long time. And she did it. She brought together DNA and genetic evidence to help name the killer in the murder of a little girl named Lisa. And from that time forward to today, Barbara and her team have helped solve more than 35 previously unsolved cold cases. That just is remarkable. Unreal. Most recently, she used this same technology and this same scientific genetic capability to help solve the Golden State serial killer case, James D'Angelo. And we're going to talk about that on another show, but that is just so neat to see happening. And rightly so. Last year, Barbara was recognized as by the Journal of Nature as one of the 10 people who mattered most in science in 2018. Wow. So, Dr. Rae-Venter, we are so pleased to have you with us tonight too. And can we say with the utmost respect how much we appreciate the contribution that you've made to our profession of public safety and criminal justice. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me, Mike.
It's really nice. We're going to have Dr. Rae-Venter just go into the green room for a minute while we bring Eric up front, and we're going to ask Eric to start telling us a little bit about the case. And Chris, I'm going to let you kind of lead the way for a moment here.
Well, I tell you, this is an absolute pleasure, Eric. But before we kick this off in totality, because this is an absolutely fascinating case, Mike, Eric was literally handed a whodunit. And he was able to really put his thinking cap on, and this comes with years of experience. And I want to point out your wall of shame that we call it, Eric, behind you there for a second. Can we zoom in on that a little, guys, so we can recognize some of the great things he's done? Tell us a little bit about your wall there.
These are some of the plaques that you get over the years from various cases that you work on. The big one in the back is from Bloomfield, where I retired before coming back out to Southern California, where I was born and raised. And up on the right is a gift from the unit commander for this Serrin case. It was a really unique gift. It was really cool. What he did was he had some sort of forensic just draw a DNA strand over like an old medical book that page number that was important to me. So it was a really thoughtful gift and something that I like to have on the wall. Good reminder.
Fantastic.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about where you're working now and the Southern California. Tell us a little bit about Carlsbad and San Diego County.
Yeah, so Carlsbad's in the northern part of San Diego County. It's a beach community. It's really, really beautiful city. It's a real pleasure to work here. Crime, for the most part, is really low. It's an affluent area. It's a beautiful place to visit. One of our mottos is, it's a beautiful place to work, play, and visit. We got 7 miles of coastline. There's our Parks and Recs department is incredible. There's just constantly things for people to thrive in the community. Southern California, the weather's fantastic. It's really a wonderful community. One of the things that was really a draw for me in terms of coming to Carlsbad Police Department is that they do an awesome job as well. I mean, it's part of making a great community, right, is having a good police force. And they really do a fantastic job. And this case really highlights an example of their leadership in that, and they're allowing me to explore different avenues that weren't necessarily orthodox, or I was going off into areas that were new, and I was spending a lot of money to do it. So they were willing to give me that latitude and that time, which is a really good testament of the leadership of the agency. So it's been a real pleasure to be there. I've been there about six and a half years now. I'm real proud to work there.
That's fantastic. Maybe this is a really great way to segue into Valentine's Day 2007. Help us understand what was happening on that particular night and why this became so significant for you.
Sure. So in 2007, I was still working on the East Coast, so I was nowhere around here at the time. But what happened in the city of Carlsbad was they had a murder, and it was this murder of Jodine Serrin. Tragic case. Family calls her Jody. Jody lived independently. She was 39 years old, but she suffered from some developmental disabilities. And she had been living on her own for about 10 years. She lived a couple of miles away from mom and dad, and they checked on her every day. She was able to live on her own, but she needed assistance. And so she would spend time during the day at various facilities where, she could interact with other adults that suffered from similar conditions. So there was a good social component. But then she lived by herself. She didn't drive. She didn't have a job. She lived in a condominium. in the southern part of Carlsbad. And she's been described, and from what I got to know of her through the family and what I read from witness statements and so forth, as just the sweetest person you could ever know, a friend to everyone. So, you know, to see something like this happen to somebody who is just so innocent and just trying to live her life with struggles, but she's just trying to live. And she was, murdered so callously, and it was, such a terrible scene. So, essentially, what happened was the mother had tried to get a hold of Jodi that day, and she was unable to raise her. And she and her husband went ahead and went on with their Valentine's Day plans. They went to dinner and a movie, and Mom had become upset that she wasn't able to contact her daughter. It was bothering her. Ended up actually leaving the movie before it was over, and they went to Jodi's condominium and they tried to raise her there. It was about 10 o'clock at night.
And this is 2007, right? At the time?
Yeah, this is 2007, Valentine's Day 2007.
Okay.
So when they go to the condominium, they knock on the door. They don't get an answer. They're ringing the bell. They don't get an answer. Because of the situation, the arrangement where they're checking on her constantly, Dad has a key. He uses a key to get in, but it's chained from, and that's not typical. So the father shoulders through the door, breaks the door down to get in, to go check on his daughter. When he gets inside, he goes down the hallway. He doesn't see her in the kitchen living room area. He goes toward the bedroom. And he sees in the bedroom that there appears to be a male in the room with his daughter. They appear to be engaged in some sort of sexual intercourse. And he tells the male, thinking that he had interrupted a sensual situation and that they would be embarrassed, he says, "Hey, put your pants on and get out of here." And he goes into the living room and he shields his wife from view of what he just saw. And they wait, and they're expecting for this couple to come out. And several minutes go by and nobody does. So he goes back to check and finds that the male's gone and that his daughter's dead. So
let me unpack this so our audience has this correct, right? And fix me as if I get it wrong. So Dad goes over because Mom's been trying to get hold of her daughter for Valentine. Nothing's happening. He gets there and discovers, because he's got a key, but the door is chained from the inside. Right?
Correct.
Pushes his way in, goes into the back, sees this male in his daughter's room, thinks that there's something going on. He steps back and tells everybody, "Come on out, everybody out." So they're waiting in the living room?
Yes. Yeah.
And unpack for us what the suspect does. How does that unfold?
So from where the living room is, there's no clear line of sight to where the bedroom is or where the front door is. There's an obstruction, the wall that separates the kitchen from the living room from the bedrooms. So they're not able to see. And what we believe happened was that he walked out of the bedroom, went around the corner, and then walked out of the condominium and fled. And there were some witnesses who said they saw somebody run southbound down the embankment through some bushes. So he took off on foot.
Interesting.
And he was able to slip out without being noticed. Probably in the shock and awe of what was going on and trying to comfort his wife and stuff. There's just enough noise between them, to miss that. And he left quietly and was gone. So, one of the things that really, really bothered me about this case when I took it on was that part of being a father and seeing something like this and knowing that the perpetrator's right there and knowing that you could have had him. in your own mind, right? And whether or not that would have went down as you would hope it would as a father. Just knowing that, and knowing that that the guy was there and you had an opportunity, and to have to live with, whatever baggage might come from that, it really bothered me. And I know it bothered a lot of the other investigators that worked this case. And I think that personal connection as a man, to try to imagine yourself in that situation made it really, really difficult for the guy and the folks and everybody that worked the case.
I've thought about that a lot, and I've thought how fortunate it was that they actually were in a separate room, because you could have had 3 homicides instead of 1. And
Absolutely.
I know that mom and dad will always have that pain that they had to not only discover, but this feeling of, could we have done more? But
Right.
there wasn't more that they could do. That was really tragic. You gave us a couple of little video clips. I thought it would be a really good time, Eric, to maybe show that first little clip to kind of set the stage of where we are in this thing at this point.
Sure.
Artie, it happened inside this condo where Jodi used to live. Now, investigators have DNA evidence, but the problem is they haven't been able to match it to anyone.
We had offender DNA from the crime scene. The DNA had been entered into CODIS, but there had been no hit in the CODIS. Without a hit in CODIS, there's really no leads or no information to follow up on.
So in this event, you get inside and you start seeing, or the original investigators see and collect a large amount of evidence. Maybe you could walk through some of the things that you discover once law enforcement gets there and is able to stabilize the scene and resolve whether Jodine was in a position that they could do life-saving measures and things.
Sure. Yeah. So she had been, obviously they called 911. They were given instructions to start CPR, but rigor mortis was already well set in. She had been gone for quite some time. So the scene ends up being handed over to the crime scene investigators and the medical examiner's office. And one of the things that they end up finding as they're going through the apartment or the condo is that there's a pair of shoes, men's shoes, that were left by the door. Now, it was customary for Jodi to have people take their shoes off when they came inside. So these shoes became pretty important in the investigation because they were coming up with anything else. Like it said in the video, they were able to get a good DNA profile for the offender, but it wasn't CODIS. So now they're trying to look for other things they can tie to it. So these shoes didn't belong to anybody that the family knew. It would have been customary for her to have them removed by a guest, which tells us a little bit about the offender, right? So when we're talking about the profiling and trying to get inside the head of or the situation, understand this is somebody who was welcomed. It would appear that it started out as somebody who's welcomed in and then, turned tragic. And there was some other evidence of that as well. So you had some, it looked like maybe there was a meal shared. You had like a pair of plates, a pair of cups. So they may have visited for a little while. And then obviously
that's really important, Sarge. Just from, again, that behavioral perspective that you talked about, that there is an indication that this is someone that's known to this victim. She somehow had a relationship, especially if they even went as far as having a meal and a drink. And the fact that he's taken his shoes off, he's probably spent some time there. But I think you also talked about uncovering some other pieces of evidence that suggested he had spent some time or planned to spend a long time there.
Yeah, well, once things turned violent, right? And, we don't know at what point that was, but obviously it went from being amicable to being violent. And when it went to being violent, he ended up doing things like taking bedding and putting it over the windows so that there would be absolute privacy and sound deadening, right? So he had time and the forethought to do these types of things to hide the fact that he was there, and he felt like he had time to do that. So, that may be indicative of him, knowing that she didn't have a lot of people coming and going from her place. He felt comfortable that he had time to do this. So some of the things that he did was there was evidence that, he had moved her after she died in different ways around the apartment. So again, you have this indication of time and the fact that he is, comfortable in that environment to use that type of time in order to play out, whatever it is in his head that he's trying to accomplish.
Let's stop there for a second, because you made a very interesting comment and observation. Unpack that, what you mean. I mean, you're still on the job. You're out there on the street. You're seeing a lot of stuff still. What does that mean when you say comfortable in his environment? Explain that for our viewers here tonight. Thank you, Susan. We love you. We just got one of our members just chipped
all right.
in.
Yeah, I got to tell you, that's a weird thing to try to wrap your head around, right? So I can't imagine being comfortable in that environment. Here you have gone into somebody's residence, you've murdered them, and now you are, carrying on in there as if it's now become, you have ultimate power now, right? And so that's something that I have a hard time unpacking myself, but I've seen it, and I know that this criminal element is capable, the sociopath is capable of not having empathy or remorse, and they don't care about the things that we care about. So it kind of tells you quite a bit about your offender and what they're capable of. So, one of the things that we tried to wrap our head around with her exposure to the groups that she associated with, right? You had some mental health issues. The mental health places where she would congregate with others were near drug treatment facilities. So the potential of her being exposed to, people who are coming in and out of, drug facilities. So you have the potential for some sort of an exposure to a drug abuser. She wasn't a drug abuser or drug user. But you try to wrap your head around what type of person could do this, what type of person could be comfortable in that environment and taking that kind of time to do those sort of things. So, those were all things that we were trying to evaluate. And I came up with a strategy to try to get to that once I took the investigation on. But initially, a lot of time was spent on those shoes, and they did a fantastic job trying to trace those back to where they came from, who they were sold to, and stuff like that. But, in 2007, DNA was, if it didn't hit in CODIS, you were resorting back to these tactics that were very labor intensive and didn't always have results, and I've been there. I totally get it.
Yeah, and there were a couple of things that we brought up that I think it'd be really nice to clarify. Let's help people quickly understand what CODIS is, and then I want to just talk for a second about rigor mortis, if we could, and maybe I'll just take that one real quickly. That this process of rigor mortis, folks, is when a person dies and oxygen leaves the system, the body starts to stiffen up, and there's this kind of relaxed state right after death that people go through. But within usually about I hope I'm on time with this, Sarge and Chris, but between 2 and 6 hours, we start to see that first stage of rigor mortis set up, and it usually starts to set up in like the eyelids and the jaw and the neck, and you can actually tell when someone's been dead for some time, even if there's life-saving efforts that go on trying to give mouth to mouth and stuff. But then it starts to slowly move to the extremities in another 2 to 6 hour block beyond that, and then beyond that, and then starts to almost reverse itself. But you spoke about the fact that there was rigor mortis there, so clearly there had been some time since this young woman died to where to when mom and dad and officers arrive. And we can look at that deeper. But why don't you also just kind of explain CODIS, Sarge, so that everybody has just a feel of what that database is and how important it is.
Sure. So CODIS is the combined DNA index system, and it is a national database that is, they'll take DNA from the local and state level. If it meets certain criteria, it goes up to the national level. So my DNA from my crime scene, if it may match an offender, their profile submitted in another state. So it's able to match those two together. And that's it's been a really powerful tool. It has its limitations, I mean, and we run into those, and, it's frustrating. And until we got to the stage that we're at now, that we're going to talk about tonight, that was it. You got to that point and you just kind of waited and hoped that maybe somebody was going to become a contributor to the database and you're going to get a hit somewhere down the road. In 2008, I want to say, there was California started doing familial testing. And they had with their DOJ, and they had the Grim Sleeper case, where you had a guy up in LA that did over 11 murders, and they were able to connect him through that first ring of people. So they'll look and they'll be able to, I guess it was his son, his profile was in CODIS, and that's how they got to him. And we tried that. We tried to do the familial searching, and we got nothing. So, again, you're trying the latest and greatest technologies that come out to try to move your case forward. And, when you come up empty, then you're kind of in this waiting stage.
Yeah. I mean, early on, right? I mean, it's at that time, it was, you had your RSOs, your registered sex offenders. You had, this would be a good time to give a shout out to all the RN SART team nurses. Yeah. And all of those guys and gals on the front lines dealing with, these sexual assault victims, God bless you. You're doing incredible things, because all of those swabs, all of the things that they're collecting for evidentiary nature, and SART means sexual assault response teams. And San Diego, by that area, we have some great people, right, Eric? I mean, just some amazing people out there. And so you end up pushing it through the system that's kind of antiquated. And then what happens next? I'm on pins and needles here already.
Well, I came to Carlsbad in 2014. And when I got here, I had a history with cold case work and homicide. And I knew that that's the direction I wanted to go. So one of the first questions I asked was, "Hey, do we have any cold cases?" And this one came up immediately, right? So this was the one that they had been holding on to for quite a while, that was really important to the community, and fresh in the sense that just so many people in my organization were involved in this in the early stages. I was fortunate enough to make it into that violent crime position and be assigned to this case. And when I was, one of the things that I set up a website, and we did a big press release, and Parabon had already been involved in the case, and they created what they call a snapshot composite, where they use the DNA to do phenotyping and come up with a likeness of what the person may have looked like. And so it's sort of this computer generated composite.
So let's hang on for a minute. Mike, let's bring Doc in here and introduce her. I think this would be a good time. What do you think?
I think it'd be great. Let's as Dr. Rae-Venter comes in, let's also play that next video clip that kind of talks about you making kind of a transition to start looking at this kind of evidence.
Breaking the case was a new technique, investigative genealogy. In investigative genealogy, we don't enter DNA into a database of criminals to try to find a criminal, but instead we use open source databases. The one we use is GEDmatch. It's an open source database. It's one that people can put their DNA into from a number of other databases. So you can test with Ancestry.com, 23andMe, MyHeritage, and you can take any of those and put that into GEDmatch yourself. It's got about a little over a million people in it. And usually with that, we can get a hit and find out maybe a second cousin or a third cousin.
Yeah, so Eric, maybe this is a great time for you to introduce how you somehow convinced the doc to come on and have breakfast with you one morning and help you in this journey. Why don't you cover that, and then we'll let you two just kind of chat for a minute.
Yeah. So when Barbara, the Golden State Killer, in April of 2018, I was inspired, right? So I thought, well, maybe this will work for our case. About that time, maybe a couple weeks later, Parabon contacted us and said, hey, since we already have the DNA for the composite we made you, let us take a look at your DNA, see if it's suitable for genealogy. And so we said, yeah, go ahead. Well, they got back to us and they said, okay, well, we found some stuff and we'd like to work it. So we got started with them, and we ended up on some journeys to go and get some people to help us out a little bit by giving us a swab and see how close or far we were from our offender. And I just happened to end up in Barbara's neck of the woods, and I had heard her name and I had found a way to get a good phone number for her. So I called her out of the blue and I introduced myself and I said, we're up in the air. Would you be willing to meet us for breakfast so we can pick your brain? And she met us for breakfast, and the rest is history.
Barbara, did you know you were in trouble when he called you?
I sure didn't, but my goodness.
Again, I want to remind people that Barbara is a practicing attorney. She's now retired, but she got into this science taking care of a personal pursuit in family history. And the rest is kind of history. But yeah, why don't you tell us about that experience of getting together and what you started to formulate as a plan in your mind, Barbara?
So it was actually Eric and the investigator that you saw in the little clip, Tony Johnson. And so as Eric said, they invited me to have breakfast with them. So there was a sort of a midway point, which was Moss Landing, which is not too far from where I am, and it was not too far from where they were coming from. So there was this little hole-in-the-wall cafe that they found, and in fact, I had trouble finding it. It was a hole in the wall. And so Eric actually...
It's a cop thing.
Eric actually texted me a picture of it so I could actually find it. So anyway, so we sit down and we go through, what is genetic genealogy and how would it work? And so that was sort of where we got started.
Amazing.
Yeah, fascinating. So educate us. What happened next?
So the next thing was of course, they had been working with Parabon, but they'd run into kind of a roadblock, what we call a brick wall in genealogy. And so Parabon had sent them sort of a summary of where they'd gotten to at that point. And so I got a copy of that and took a look at it. And so I was actually going on a trip to Ireland. I was giving a presentation. And so I went off on my trip, and of course I kept checking to see if we had any new matches. And so I got back from a day of conferences, and of course before I went to bed, I checked the computer, and there was a big match sitting there. I was so excited, I actually called Eric from Ireland.
Wow.
What time was it?
Yeah.
Well, in Ireland, it was around midnight. I have no idea what time it was in California.
We have some of our members are from Ireland in our family here in the PE family. So they're cool. Yeah. So you find it's sitting there. You shoot a call, and then what happened?
Well, it was interesting because the last name of the person was actually a name that had been ruled out by Parabon, and so that was very interesting. And so as soon as
how could that have happened? Do you think? Is there a reason why?
There was. So what happened is, one of the things that you do when you start working on these cases is you put together a little profile, and one of the things that you include in the profile is the ethnic makeup of the person, because there are several utilities that you can use. There's one on GEDmatch, and there's one on Family Tree DNA, and so it will tell you. It's fairly accurate when you're looking at the continent level, and so according to the ethnic estimate that these folks had done, they decided that this person with this last name was not Caucasian, or at least that they were not regular Western European, that they were probably Southern European, and that did not appear in the ethnic profile.
Interesting.
So what it turned out, of course, was that this person was actually adopted. And so they didn't match their profile that went along with the surname they had, which was, of course, their adoptive surname. So
interesting.
So
did you tell Eric all this at that time? Were you aware of this, Eric, or did you learn this later?
I was just sitting on every word, just waiting for everything that she had to say. I was just, okay,
kind of like
us where I need to go.
Right? Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Doc, but so finish your thought.
So, what was amazing about this is, the people who were working on this was a team, like a lot of these cases are. It was actually the same team of folks who worked on the Golden State Killer. So it was myself and Steve Kramer from the FBI, and then a couple of folks from the Sacramento DA's office, and of course Eric. And so one of the lady from the Sacramento DA's office, we called her the Google Queen. She was absolutely amazing at finding pieces of information on obscure notice boards. So now that we'd figured out that we had a surname that was of interest here, she found a notice on a notice board from somebody with the same last name who was adopted, and he actually put in what both his birth name and his adoptive name was in this little obscure notice that was found. So, of course, we started looking at this, and then what was interesting about it is there was actually another person who had been working on this case as well, and that was Colleen Fitzpatrick. And Colleen works on Y-DNA, and so she had actually done what she calls an identifinder profile, looking at people who match on the Y-DNA, which of course is transmitted down the male line from father to son, and it usually matches up with the surname. And so looking at people who had matched on the Y-DNA with crime scene DNA, she'd come up with a couple of surnames. One was Morrison and one was Miracle. And I was just having good luck, I guess, with new matches showing that there was on the GEDmatch website, we had another new match show up. Last name was Miracle.
Wow.
I just love watching this. When we're interrogating killers and you see them start talking about something that excites them and they remember this, there's a certain way that they get animated. When you talk to cops about what they got that started changing this, there's a certain animation. Barbara, you're just lighting up as you relive this experience, and it's so exciting to us that there's such passion in what you're saying. And it's so amazing that you're able to do this. So you got to keep going here.
Well, it is exciting. I mean, it's a real adrenaline rush. I mean, you're sitting there, and it could be 3 a.m, and you're looking at your computer screen, and then this name pops up. It's just kind of like, whoa! I didn't call Eric that time.
I think he would have taken it and been happy about it.
So anyway, so of course now we've got a better way to work our tree, and suddenly we were able to fill in some of the blanks that we had, and to solve who in fact the perpetrator was. But it was really, just getting these two breaks with these two new matches that were showing up. And so there we had it. And then it was just a case of then getting confirmation. And I think Eric then contacted the family that we had identified that had a son. And so, of course, the son should be a match. And so he went from there. And
and what a challenge that had to have been. I didn't see that you were thinking of something there, Chris. But Eric, as you tear apart how you came up with a strategy to approach a family on something that they probably weren't aware of, that is such a huge challenge, and something that had to have been difficult.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was a really difficult part of the case. You had a family who had no idea that this offender had done what he had done. And what was interesting about the identity of the offender is that we found out he had been deceased for quite some time. He had committed suicide in 2011. So that created some challenges for us. We contacted the medical examiner's office. We tried to see if they had any biological material remaining from the autopsy they performed. They didn't. So we were trying to not have to approach the family, but we ultimately did. And so when we did, you have, a former wife and son who believe, that, they've been mourning the loss of, this fella, believing he'd committed suicide, depression and so forth, which may have been the case. But what we ended up finding was that, I'll get to that in a second. But so when we went to talk to them, it was an interesting conversation. We introduced ourselves. I went with Tony. He's the DA investigator you saw in the video, and we pretty much just laid it out. We said, "Hey, we're working on a cold case murder. We believe that if we were to get your DNA, it would help us, be able to identify the perpetrator. And would you be willing to help us with that?" And they were very understanding. And when we talked to them, they kind of shared a couple of other things. We talked about David was the name of the offender. We talked about David and his death, and they had mentioned that he had been kind of sketchy about being swabbed by the local police department where he lived just days before his suicide. So
what was the circumstance? Why were they swabbing him? Do you know?
Well, you know what? It was good proactive police work by, a patrol officer that spotted David pushing his truck, right? He's pushing his truck. He's trying to push it into where he's going to park it. And the patrol officer stops him and recognizes that, hey, this is a white pickup truck, white male, dirty blonde hair, matches a suspect description on a bolo from another crime, a bulletin that came out. So they
Was it a sexual assault? Was it a sexual assault?
No, it was a property crime. I think it was a robbery.
Yeah, we use the term share. Is that a 211?
Yeah.
Going on down there?
211.
Okay.
Yeah.
They hit him on a 211 family.
Yeah. So they stopped and they asked him, hey, would you mind if we, they're going to do an FI, a field interview. They took some photos of him and they asked him to consent to a cheek swab, and he did. And then apparently he was pretty sketched out about having provided his DNA. And then within like a week, he committed suicide. Wow. So they explained those circumstances to us, which we were not aware of. And I was able to contact that agency and found that they still have that swab in their property and evidence room. So for us, when it comes down to confirmation, and we went ahead and we took the swabs from the mother and the son, and they were able to do the confirmatory work that we needed and come back with a strong enough result, the crime lab, strong enough result doing that testing to be satisfied that it would, be a match and
Yeah,
be
well, why don't we play that clip and just let folks see that, meet the family.
Yeah.
Oh, we lost our audio on that one, so maybe we can come back to that in just a moment. One of the things I'd just like to step back on is just how remarkable it is that you were able to sit down with them and share something that is potentially so painful for them.
Yeah.
I mean, there are never any winners in these cases, are there?
No.
Yeah.
And one other thing,
ahead.
real fast, I'm sorry, think about the universe being on schedule here. Okay? This idea that there's a robbery case totally independent of anything else going on, right? And some evidence tech, there had to be some type of, biological fluid of something left at that robbery scene for them to swab it. And then that goes into evidence. That's the first swab, right? And then a patrol officer comes to work that night or whenever the time frame was, right, Eric? I don't know the time frame. And in a briefing, the supervisor says, hey, we've got this, series or whatever the incidents are. And by the way, we have DNA. If you pull a suspect over, you think they're involved, try to get a consensual DNA swab on it, right? That's what this patrol officer did. Am I right?
Yeah. And I mean, that's the kind of stuff that really stands out, right? Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, cases. Well, let's go back and see if we can try to get this video again.
He'd been cremated, so there was no way to get his DNA. However, what we hoped is we could go to his son and the mother of the son, get DNA from both of them.
They came to the house and had said that they were investigating a cold case from 2007 and had wanted to talk to my son and I, and couldn't imagine why.
Never heard anything about it before, but it kind of, I don't know, felt weird that he was coming to us about it. I wasn't really sure what for.
When Eric Kovanda and I went over to the house that night, I felt it was necessary to lay out the entire case and the investigation to explain the need for getting the DNA. Before I was even done explaining, Marissa said, well, do you want my DNA? That shows you the amount of cooperation that they had right from the start. I mean, they're just good people.
About a month later, he came to us and said that I believe the DNA from my swab matched, I think it was, and they ended up pulling something with genealogy, and it ended up being my dad. So it was very heavy, and
I thought, there's no way. There was just no way. I still have a hard time wrapping my head around it. And as we were talking in that conversation, they asked me about clothing and such, and I saw a photocopied picture of shoes, and I asked to see them, and as soon as I see them, my gut knew.
When Marissa noticed the shoes and they were showing a picture of the shoes, she knew absolutely, without a doubt, that those shoes belonged to her ex-husband.
it hit me pretty hard at first, but then I saw what it did to my mom too, so I felt like I kind of needed to be stronger.
That was a hard day.
That's just so touching and amazing. And Eric, maybe you can come back and share what was going on in the family when you went through that. But Barbara, maybe you could take a moment and help us understand how a swab from mom and a swab from son equals who the perpetrator is.
Well, so what they were trying to do was determine what was the paternal part of the swab that they were getting from David, so that they could then look at that in comparison with the crime scene DNA, and then they would know that they were looking at his paternal line, and so they could then determine for sure that this really was his dad.
So they were necessary in order to isolate just the father's DNA out of what the son had and exclude the mother's DNA.
Yeah, it was basically a paternity test.
Yeah.
So that's all they were really doing, just showing it, who is his dad.
Yeah.
Wow. So so this went from an adoption situation into a potential known ID positive match. We're in the ballpark here.
Right, and as you can see from the last name, which was Mabrito, that had been interpreted as being Hispanic and not what it was, which was that he was really a miracle, which was not Hispanic.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's amazing.
I was going to say that when it came to doing confirmation, I was really leery about making sure that I had really confirmed what was going on. So we had the paternity test, and that was okay. I got DNA from the brother to rule him out, so he was excluded. And then we got that sample that was the known sample from David from the other agency, and that's how we were able to conclusively say they were willing to say it with the paternity test, but with that known sample being tested against the offender sample from the crime scene, they were able to say that the odds of it being anybody other than David was 1 in 64 quintillion. So we were good to go. And at that point, we went ahead and said, that we the case.
That's amazing. You any questions on that, Chris?
No, I just was curious because at that point now, you've got a scientific proof that you've got your guy here. Explain your emotions to our audience of what that feels like, and working so many hours with great people like the doc here. But as an investigator, what were you feeling?
I got to tell you, for me, the joy that I felt for Jodi's parents, just taking that 11 years of anguish and being able to offer some relief. You're never going to be able to all better, unfortunately, but to be able to offer some relief for some to be able to provide them with some answers and give them some resolution. Mr. Serrin had feared that this person was out there hurting other people. And so to be able to say, hey, listen, we know who did it. We know these are the circumstances. And we sat and we met with them. And, it was really sad, and it was touching to me. Mrs. Serrin, it told me that, she had kind of lost hope after all these years. And she was taken back by the fact that we had actually solved it. Like, she didn't think we were going to be able to. So it was nice to be able to give that to them, to sort of reignite hope and let them know that, hey, listen, we never forgot. We stayed on the path, and we followed every potential to get to where we are, to be able to tell you we know who did this. So the joy that I felt for them was huge, but I also felt that same joy for everybody involved in the case, because we invest so much of ourselves into this work to get those answers for people, and to be able to be met with success and to be able to have those answers to give to a family that's grieving. It meant a lot to a lot of people.
Yeah, there was a lot of people in the very beginning, right? You level set them too. So let's give them a shout out. Who actually were some of the first responders back when they first got to the scene before you ended up picking up the caper, if you remember?
Yeah, I know that, there's so many people that worked the case.
Be careful, because if you forget somebody, you're gonna hurt somebody's feelings. So
tell you this, here's what I'll do. They all know who they are, and they all did fantastic work.
There you go.
When I picked up the case, it was really difficult for me to find something that had not been done. So thank God, Barbara came out with this genealogy stuff when I had the case so that I could do something new.
Yeah. And Barbara, I wanted to know from you if you feel like you now know who Jodine is and these 35 other people who you have brought closure to.
Well, I read a lot of the news articles and interviews with her parents, and yeah, she sounded like the sweetest person in the world. I think one of the stories that stuck with me, and I don't know where I read it, was that she was so very giving that her parents could go over to her home, and there might be a homeless guy in the shower, or she might be cooking a meal for somebody who didn't have any food. She was just that kind of very giving, very innocent person. And so it was just an incredibly tragic case.
Yeah.
Interesting.
You know, Eric, what you did here was you brought hope for families that have cases like this and they've not been able to see resolution. What you have done, Barbara, is you brought hope to investigators all around the world.
Yeah.
And I know that you two have been out and continue to go out teaching law enforcement how to embrace this technology and this science. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Eric, or do you want to? Okay, so yeah, so I have given a number of workshops, and in fact, I'm giving one in September at I call it the ISHI conference, and of course, I'm not going to remember what the acronym stands for, but in any event, it's giving a workshop on how to do investigative genetic genealogy in things like these cold cases, either for identifying unidentified remains or for identifying suspects. I think one of the things that really, for me, is a little odd is that, I'm coming in at the end of, 10, 20, 30, 40 years of work done by law enforcement on some of these cases. And, generally we can solve them in some fairly short period of time. And I was actually asked a question, this was about Michelle McNamara, and whether or not she had actually helped to solve the Golden State Killer case. Well, the answer is no, not in a formal sense, but what she did, which is actually what all these people like Eric and all the other law enforcement folks who are working on these cold cases are doing, is keeping the cases alive, keeping them in the forefront of people's brains, so that when something new comes along, like investigative genetic genealogy, they can jump on it and can solve the cases. So it's a huge shout out to the people who, really stick to trying to solve these cases after years and years and years and years. With Golden State, Paul Holes had worked on that case for 22 years. We solved it in 63 days, but it's really the 22 years and, all the other work that was done getting to that point, keeping the case alive, that made it possible then to solve it.
Wow.
That is fantastic. And I just, as you talk, I have to say, not only are those police officers keeping it alive, we have to continually remind ourselves that convictions don't come on one single form of evidence. And that while we have brought in with genetic testing forensic evidence that is so powerful, we still need all that gumshoe work that happens out there, that is getting statements, witness statements, and looking at circumstantial evidence, and just examining everything in totality so that a prosecutor can take a case to trial and win that case. And you two are just like the shining example of how different disciplines can come together. And I think it's one of the things, Eric, I'd like you to maybe chat about for just a moment, and that is how law enforcement has figured out that they need to rely on this whole community of professionals in order to be successful.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that really drew me to Barbara when we had breakfast at that little hole in the wall was that you know, I sat down with her and she essentially said, listen, this is how we do it. You're an investigator. That's your trade craft. You can do this. And to have that type of open dialogue with somebody, you know, like Barbara, you know, a lawyer and a PhD and all this other stuff. And, you know, when I was working with the FBI, there was an analyst that joked that the cops on the squad were, you know, the knuckle draggers, right? So it kind of, because, you know, we go our thing and we catch the bad guys and all that other stuff. And then you talk to very intellectual people, and sometimes there's a lack of the ability to communicate and connect on that stuff. And she brought herself down to a level where we were able to communicate beautifully. And I could see right away that she wasn't just going to help me. She was going to show me how to do it. And that, to me, as an investigator, is gold, right? Because I need to understand how this works. I need to be able to explain it. I need to be able to understand, okay, you took a case that the cops worked on for 22 years and you solved it in 63 days. You need to explain that to me. So, you know, yeah, that stuff is amazing. And she has the ability to be able to, you know, break it down at a level where we can, you know, work with it. And then, you know, my hope is to be able to, hey, cop to cop, let me tell you what I've learned, right? Because, you know, when we talk, you know, we're cut from the same cloth. The communication flows really easily. And, you know, I've talked to a bunch of labs and I've talked to a bunch of, you know, folks in this field. I've really kind of gone out and networked quite a bit, and not everybody has the ability to connect with us the same way. So my hope is to be able to kind of bridge that gap and help law enforcement trust what's happening here and approach it in a way that they can move their cases forward.
Chris, I mean,
what do you say?
Yeah. What would you have given to have Eric Kovanda on your team and to have Barbara as a resource to help you in these investigations?
Yeah, I mean, they're the real deal. And we're talking, you know, some just incredible, not only incredible humility here, but, and this is what it takes. This is what makes an amazing team of investigators. You know, you've got to check that ego at the door, and you've got to realize you're there because you have a family who's grieving. And that pain never goes away until somehow they get closure. And man, if Eric and Dr. Venter are not, you know, the epitome of that example, you know, and this is one of the reasons, Mike, that you even said, let's do this channel so that we could have these kind of moments tonight. And I just think it's fantastic. Well, anyway, I'm blown away. I'm blown away. They're great people. They've done amazing stuff here. And, you know, we're getting a couple of questions over here. Do you guys have time for some questions and stuff? I don't want to, Mike, are we on track here?
If you two can stay a minute longer, I think we would love to ask a couple of questions to just see your responses, and I'll take advantage of just this break to give you a breath. And I have a couple of questions still for both of you too. In fact, I even have a couple of photographs I'm going to share that we dug up from your past. It's just kind of something we do here on the on Profiling Evil. So hang on to that. But you know what? We've had so many people weigh in tonight with so many things. Moonlight View, Lori, but not that Lori. I love that one. Raul, Felicia, RN student forensics, Avon Apples. We've had new members joining up tonight, Chris. We've had
George.
Incredible.
I love that name.
Yeah, we've had some incredible super chat help. Thank you, Meredith's Dells. And you guys have got to love these names. I mean, this is as someone who looks at behavior and does profiling, I want to tear apart every name on these.
Melissa Carvel, thank you so much. We've got, so yeah, This is great. Dr. Latina, okay, thank you so much. You're very kind. Thank you. What
Yeah,
else?
Curious Georgia, thank you. And folks, I'm going to just throw a shameless little plug out here and just invite you all. If you have missed the last time we spoke, we talked about a little offer that we decided to throw out. I put 4 of my books up to a drawing for anyone who happens to go in. I think we'll post up a little thing here where you can click on and just get your name and enter into a drawing to go in and get those 4 books. And then I think 4 additional people will get 1 book each sent to you. So please do that. We want to be able to get those out to you and help out. And we would ask you to keep pushing cases to the evidence room. Eric, I don't know if you're aware of this, Doc. What we did is we get so much, we call it CSI, community sourced intelligence from people on this show, that we set up a evidence room where people can go in and weigh in and leave information, and we package that up and forward it on to a police department on an unsolved case. So Eric, what it might mean for you is receiving an email with 50 leads and web links and videos and Snapchats and all of this stuff from people who really do care. And they're doing it without any idea of whether it will ever be seen or acknowledged, other than for us to be able to say we're pushing it forward to people like you with boots on the ground. So, thank you. And folks, thank you for continuing to do that. So, Chris,
we
what
got
are
a question.
questions?
We got a question. First of all, Callahan, thank you. Welcome to the team. Okay, first question, Lynn Dumas. Was he guilty of any other crime? Guys, who wants to take that?
I'll take it. Yeah, you know, he was he had a very scant record. He some stuff earlier on in his life, but he had pretty much stayed off the radar. And what we kind of believe in this particular situation is that this was like a drug-induced psychotic episode. There was some indication that he had was abusing methamphetamine, and that this culminated along with some other life stressors at that time.
Okay, interesting. Another one is, how did they cross paths, if you know?
I don't. And, you know, it's interesting. A lot of times with these cold cases, you'll go back and you'll find that your offenders somewhere in that file, but they originally didn't rise to a level of suspicion. They were a witness or, you know, a more distant party, and they focused on somebody else. And sometimes you'll find your offender in there later. He's no in that case. So we don't know how it is that that they contacted each other. If he knew somebody else in the complex, or he happened to be passing through. As Barbara mentioned, she was a friend to everyone. So if he looked like he needed a meal, she might have. It could be that simple.
Interesting. Yeah, that's an old investigative technique that you mentioned, right? Explain where you go when you get a cold case, to help our viewers understand that. When they hand you that package, you know, and it's 11 years old, and they say, here, figure this out. Unwrap that for us real fast.
Yeah, I got to tell you, it's
Pause.
Yeah, what a challenge. Yeah.
And
So-
you went back. Go ahead, Mike.
No, yeah, you got to keep going back, right? You got to keep going back and digging until you find something. So I'm going to just throw a little curveball here just to kind of have some fun. So, Dr. Rae-Venter, I don't know if you remember this day when you graduated from school, but you have done some amazing things. And Chris keeps saying to me, keeps sending me little texts saying, ask Barbara about Billboard Boy. I don't know what on earth he's talking about, but can you shed some light on that?
Well, Billboard Boy is actually the case that you alluded to in your introduction. So that was the case. It was a case out of North Carolina. Some skeletonized remains of a child had been found under a billboard along, I think it was I-90. in North Carolina. And of course, they didn't have anything at all. I mean, this was just a skeleton with some clothes hanging off of it. So the detective called me, and he had this real cute North Carolina accent. And he goes, he'd really like it if we could do genetic genealogy on this, and would I be willing to do that? So I said, sure. And he goes, well, there's just one thing. He goes, and this is the end of November. And he says, I'm going to be retiring at the end of the year. Do you think you could solve the case by the end of the year?
Oh my goodness.
This is a 20-year-old cold case, right? So I said, well, I would sure try, but I couldn't promise. So this was another one of my cases where I got really lucky with the matches. And so we get the file uploaded to GEDmatch, and I go into GEDmatch, and we have a very large match sitting there. This is a first cousin once removed. Now, first cousin once removed, given that this was a child, it meant that we were looking at probably a grandparent on one side and a great-grandparent on the other. So I called the detective back, and I said, the other thing that we had found out when I ran the admixture or ethnicity on this child was actually 50% Caucasian and 50% Asian.
Oh,
And so, and I had information on the Y DNA that this was actually a Caucasian Y DNA, and so I knew that the father was white and the mother was Asian. So I called the detective back, and I said, what you need to do is call the person who is the match. Well, you want to speak to his father and ask the father if he has a brother who had a biracial child. And so the detective did that. And apparently the response was, well, yes, one of my brothers was stationed in Korea. And gee, come to think of it, haven't seen little Tommy in a while.
Wow.
And so it turned out that the brother had told the family members that Tommy and his mom had gone back to Korea. And so nobody had asked where they were. There was no missing persons report. So we were able to, in fact, determine that this was little Tommy. So then, of course, the question was, well, where's mom? And so they started looking to see if there were any missing Asian women, and it turned out there was a body of an Asian woman had been found in Spartanburg, right across the state line in South Carolina. And so, of course, it didn't take too long to determine that this was little Tommy's mom.
Wow.
And so, yeah,
amazing.
it's a horrible story. So anyway, it turns out that actually Dad was sitting in the federal pen. And so they approached him. He'd apparently some kind of hold up stuff with a weapon. I'm not sure of all the details. In any event, he initially refused to cooperate. But the family members, of course, that the detectives had been talking to were outraged. And so they contacted him, said, you are giving it up. And so he did. They were full confession. So my detective got 2 solves on unidentified remains, and he solved who did it, all before he retired.
All before he retired. That is the sweetest gift. A friend of ours was Detective Lieutenant Kenny Landwehr in the Wichita Police Department. He was the case agent for the BTK killer, who it was just a horrid killer that we had the opportunity to do some work on. And Kenny's Hope, that was a case that he got in the first few months of his law enforcement career. And he spent 30 years chasing BTK and finally was able to put him in prison. And what you did is something that I think Eric and every investigator out there can really understand, and that is to help them get closure to something that they carry for years and years and years, because the cops never stop thinking about these kids or these adults that they work cases on. But Chris, Sprinkle Cake really helped out, gave us.
Yeah, no. So this is Eric, this is going to be a sensitive question here, okay? And I want to frame it up so that we know that the family or some of the other individuals involved in this caper. So, but one of the thought process is And the question is, when you were an investigator, and I'm just going to paraphrase what Sprinkle Cake is asking here, and thank you, Sprinkle Cake, we love that name, by the way, is essentially, in this particular incident, the suspect had moved some furniture around, a mirror and all this other stuff, and positioned it so that there could be some voyeurism going on. How did that play into a role of, your thought process when you were unwrapping a behavioral analysis to what you potentially could be looking at? Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, absolutely. A couple of things for me. So, we talked earlier about how I came into this late and, the approach that I end up taking. So, initially that's going to mean, like we talked about with, the hanging of the linens over the windows and the amount of time that was taken, that somebody was putting a lot of effort into carrying out some sort of fulfilling some sort of a drive. And so you have these, paraphilic activity that's going on. They're sort of engaging in some sort of activity that they have this need to do. So in this particular case, it was sexual activity, and you had the voyeurism, and you had somebody that was, taking steps to be able to see what they were doing. It's interesting from a behavioral part. It kind of made a lot of sense to me when we learned about the how he suffered from an addiction to methamphetamines, because methamphetamines are commonly associated with increased sex drive and used in certain for that purpose. So the fact that this person would use the methamphetamines in association with that type of activity, and then become so fixated on what he was doing that he would take the time to do these things because he's so focused on what it is that he's trying to accomplish. That part was very interesting to me, but I have to tell you, like, from my standpoint, coming in, 8-9 years later to look at a case, I'm looking at all those things and I'm seeing this about the offender, and I'm thinking, okay, wow, we're dealing with somebody that's got a lot of issues here. But I'm like laser focused on, that's all neat. And I know that everybody before me has looked at all that stuff, and I trust that they've done a really good job. What specifically in this case can I do to get from the scene to my perpetrator? And I know that that's going to come down to the physical evidence and the DNA and being able to make that connection. So I was so focused on being able to connect my DNA evidence to an offender that, once we got on this path with genealogy, and I understood that we would be able to, find our way through this maze and get the needle in the haystack, I was all in.
That's great.
Yeah.
Hey, I want to just say thanks to Stephanie Herb. Good Russian name there. And as I want to put something up here to just kind of have you guys bring it full circle. But Chris, if you had a question first before we.
No, I just wanted to point out, Sprinkle Cake, don't worry about your question. It was fantastic. It was very sensitive. Don't worry, it was a heavy question. That's why we've got them down there to answer those heavy questions. But no sweat. We appreciate you and grateful that you're here with us. So I just want to be sensitive to that. Go ahead.
And the questions, Captain of my soul, the sexual fantasies. Boy, you see those things acted out in these cases like crazy. Thank you for that, Toy Airy. Moonlight View. We really appreciate all of you. Eric and Barbara both. I'd like you to comment on this photo and really bring this thing around for us.
Yeah, I don't know if Barbara was aware of this. So the district attorney's office recognized Marissa and Dylan, the ex-wife and son of the offender, for their bravery in helping us to solve this case. And so it was the Citizen of Courage Award. And when they received the award, Jody's parents came down to support them. So you see Art and Lois Serrin to the right in front of me, and then Dylan and his mom to the left of them, and then Sergeant Opeka all the way on the left, who happens to be the guy that gave me that picture I talked about. So.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And again, just a reminder that this was heartbreaking for everyone involved. And I'll tell you from the bottom of my heart, I'm so grateful for the efforts that you and Barbara have put into solving this cold case. Chris, anything?
No, Mike, I mean, what a fantastic panel we've had here tonight. I mean, you guys, we are so grateful to you for your service of what you're doing out there. And I know you're both still actively involved solving, active cases out there. And it's because of you guys that, things get done. And so the second, half of that is thank you to our viewers, for trusting Mike and I that we can bring you some quality, great people that you're seeing in front of you. These are America's heroes. They're behind the scenes, but they, as you can tell tonight, they're making a difference. But it is you, the citizens, that solve crimes. And that's why, we have the evidence room. If you find information, please drop it in there. But first call 911. Make these folks like Eric and Doc Venter here aware of what you may or may not know. And we couldn't do this show without you. So we want to thank everybody that's been here tonight. Please keep hitting that subscribe button down there. We need you to spread the word so that we can bring other heroes to this channel, and hopefully we can make a difference. Mike, I think it's just been a great night.
Yeah, it's been a great evening. Open up your Twitter accounts and tweet out Profiling Evil, pound Profiling Evil, or hashtag Profiling Evil, and call out Dr. Rae-Venter, Rae-Venter and Sergeant Kovanda. And folks, join us Monday night when we have a live Q&A. We're going to just spend some time with you and try to answer questions. Gabriella H., thank you so much. We're going to try to get your ideas on what you want to see coming down the pike. And then please, please, please tell everyone you know, next Thursday night, we're going to be talking Operation Underground Railroad. We'll be bringing in operators in Taiwan. We'll be bringing operators from across the United States to talk about human trafficking and the threats to our children and to all of us in this area of human trafficking. We'll be hearing from the pros. All of the super chats or anything else donated that night's going to Operation Underground Railroad to help them continue to do their thing. And I just want to say one more time to Sergeant Eric Kovanda, Carlsbad Police Department, thank you so much for staying in the saddle and doing this on both the East and the West Coast. And Dr. Barbara Rae-Venter, thank you for doing this now globally and teaching with Eric police officers to embrace and take advantage of this amazing genetic science. And to all of you, thanks and have a great night.
Yep. Carlsbad, lucky to have you, buddy. Great man.
Thanks for having us on, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris.
Could I ask a favor about
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
So anybody out there who has done DNA testing and would like to help law enforcement, if you would be so kind as to upload your raw DNA data profile from either Ancestry or wherever you've tested to GEDmatch or to Family Tree DNA, you can help us with our work.
That's fantastic. Doc, if you could send us a link to where you'd like that and a little statement, we'll post it in our comments section, and that will go out to all of the folks that are listening now and listening in the future. What a great service that would be.
It would be fabulous. Thank you.
Thanks. Good night, everyone.
See you guys.
Night.